The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. Not the kind that washes things clean, the kind that soaks into your bones and makes the world heavy. Streets turned to rivers of mud, swallowing boot tracks before you could follow them. The wind pushed low clouds over the rooftops, trapping the smell of old smoke from last night's gunfight. It clung to the town like a second skin, the kind you'd never shed. By the time she rode in, the place had already been primed with rumors. Men leaning over whiskey glasses, voices kept just above a whisper. They said she carried something in her coat pocket, not gold, not letters, but a folded scrap of paper stained with a man's blood, the ink smudged and bled by the same rain that now ran down her cheek like tears she didn't claim. And with it, a single bullet, brass casing dulled from years of travel, thumb-worn, etched with a name no one dared say aloud. Some swore the bullet carried the sheriff's name. Others swore it belonged to the outlaw hiding in the canyon, the one no posse could flush out. But those who'd been around long enough knew better than to ask her outright. Asking meant she might answer. And if she answered, well, then you'd know something she meant to keep quiet. And folks who knew her secrets didn't tend to live long enough to share 'em. Out past the northern ridge, a gunshot cracked. It wasn't close enough to rattle poker chips or stop the player's hands, but close enough to pull the eyes of every man near a window, every man except her. She kept her gaze dead ahead, riding slow, water dripping steady from the brim of her hat, leather saddle groaning under her weight. Her horse's breath steamed in the cold air, each step sinking into the muck with a sound like a grave filling in. The saloon's swinging doors moaned as she pushed through. No one spoke. Even the piano went quiet, like the room itself was holding its breath. On a corner table, a revolver slid across the worn wood, its barrel still wet from the rain outside. The lamplight caught the steel, throwing a glint that seemed to travel straight to her eyes. She didn't sit. Didn't smile. Just rested a gloved hand on it, the way you touch something that's been yours for a long, long time. That hand didn't tremble. The last time she'd held this revolver, it had been pressed into a man's ribs, her finger already pulling the trigger. But she hadn't fired. Not then. Once, long ago, they'd called what she had with him love. Now it was something colder. Something sharper. The kind of thing that only ended one of two ways, with one of them in the ground. She took the revolver, slipped it into her holster, and turned for the door. The room didn't breathe until she was gone. Out on the street, the rain eased just enough for her voice to carry in the stillness. They said I rode in alone, she murmured, not to anyone in particular. They were wrong. A breeze caught the brim of her hat, lifting her gaze to the far end of the street, a figure standing in the shadow of the old church, coat hanging heavy, hand resting on his hip where the weight of a gun would be. Her lips tightened, but her pace didn't change. She walked toward him, slow as the tide. In her pocket, the bullet shifted, catching the faintest glint of light. That's when the truth settled over the town like a noose tightening. She didn't come here for peace. She came here to finish something that had been left undone. Death, they realized, had come to Dead Man's Hollow, and it was wearing her face. Dawn didn't come gentle to Dustwater Hollow. It bled in slow through the fog, staining the horizon the color of old rust. The streets lay quiet but for the wind, carrying the smell of wet timber and last night's gunpowder. Over the general store, the sign creaked on its chain, swaying like it knew the whole town was holding its breath. That's when they saw her, one rider, black coat heavy with rain, horse lathered from the long road. Hoofs struck the muddy street with a sound that carried into every doorway. Curtains shifted. Somewhere, a child pressed his nose to the cold glass of a boarding house window. His eyes widened before a shadowed hand pulled the curtain closed. Folks in Dustwater had long memories, and they didn't forget a face like hers. Not after what happened 3 winters back. Some swore she was the marshal's girl, the one who'd vanished like smoke after a bloodbath no one dared name out loud. Others whispered she'd ridden with the very men the marshal hunted, until that fateful night when the canyon floor ran red. Whatever truth there was, she didn't look left or right as she passed. She didn't nod to the old men frozen on the porch of the livery, didn't slow when the blacksmith's hammer stopped mid-swing. Her eyes were locked dead ahead, like she could already see the door she meant to walk through. The bounty posters fluttering in the wet wind told the rest of the story, her face sketched in charcoal, the reward stamped below in bold black print. The rain kept the ink sharp, and the paper curled just enough to make it look like the poster itself was trying to turn away from her gaze. She passed the sheriff's office without a glance. Inside, the man in the chair kept his hat low over his eyes, but his fingers curled hard around the arms of the seat. Across the street, the saloon doors shifted in the wind, letting out the stale perfume of whiskey, tobacco, and last night's trouble. She swung off her horse slow, boots sinking into the muck, tying her reins with the quiet precision of a woman who'd learned never to rush, not when steel and lead might decide the next breath you take. The street stayed silent behind her as she stepped up onto the boards and pushed through the saloon doors. Inside, the world froze. The barkeep halted mid-pour, the amber stream of whiskey trembling in the glass. A card game stopped mid-hand, a half-played queen resting under calloused fingers. Men stared, but no one spoke. Her boots sounded heavy on the warped floorboards, the shadows bending long in the lamplight. She walked to the back corner, each step deliberate, until she reached the table where Kane always took his breakfast. The chair sat pushed out, as if he'd just stood. The plate of eggs was still warm. The coffee steamed, curling into the air like a ghost that hadn't decided if it wanted to stay. But Kane was gone. Not a trace, not a sound, not even the scrape of a chair leg on the floor. And somewhere outside, far off but clear in the quiet, a single gunshot cracked the morning wide open. Inside, the world froze. The barkeep halted mid-pour, the amber stream of whiskey trembling in the glass. A card game stopped mid-hand, a half-played queen resting under calloused fingers. Men stared, but no one spoke. Her boots sounded heavy on the warped floorboards, the shadows bending long in the lamplight. She walked to the back corner, each step deliberate, until she reached the table where Kane always took his breakfast. The chair sat pushed out, as if he'd just stood. The plate of eggs was still warm. The coffee steamed, curling into the air like a ghost that hadn't decided if it wanted to stay. But Kane was gone. Not a trace, not a sound, not even the scrape of a chair leg on the floor. And somewhere outside, far off but clear in the quiet, a single gunshot cracked the morning wide open. The paper was stained at the edges, soft from being read and reread until the ink almost bled. Kane's handwriting crawled across it, jagged but sure, "If you love me, don't follow." The words sat heavy in the air, the kind that felt like they could choke you if you let them. She stared at the line like it might change if she looked hard enough. But it didn't. It was the same as the night she first read it, the same as the night she swore she'd never obey it. Memory cut through the smoke and whiskey smell, dragging her back to a cold ridge under a blood-red sky. Kane, slumped against her, his shirt dark with the life leaking out of him. Her hand pressed to the wound, his breath shallow against her ear, his voice a rasp she could barely hear, "Don't come after me." Back then, she'd promised. Swore it like it meant something. But a promise made to a dying man doesn't always survive the night. Now, sitting in the half-light of the saloon, that promise felt like ash on her tongue. The barkeep moved away, muttering something about not wanting trouble, but his eyes never left her. She folded the letter once, twice, sliding it back into her coat like tucking away a loaded gun. The question burned hotter than the whiskey in the room: why would Kane tell her to stay away? And why now, after all the roads they'd bled to cross together? She didn't have the answer. But answers had a way of finding her, and they usually came with Gunsmoke. It happened fast. Too fast for anyone to breathe, let alone speak. A gunshot ripped through the saloon window, the sound cracking against the walls like lightning splitting the sky. Glass shattered in a silver rain, catching the lamplight as it fell. Men ducked, curses filled the air, the barkeep hit the floor behind the counter. She didn't move. Just turned her head slow, eyes narrowing at the jagged hole in the window, the smoke still curling from somewhere beyond. The letter in her pocket felt heavier now, like maybe it wasn't just words on paper, maybe it was a death sentence, and someone out there was ready to sign it and lead. The shot was still echoing in her ears when her boots hit the mud. She didn't think, she moved. The saloon door slammed behind her, rain slashing across her face as she scanned the street. Somewhere in the dark, Boots splashed through puddles, retreating fast. She cut left, past the hitching posts, down where the main road bled into a narrow gap between buildings. The alley swallowed the light hole, stinking of wet wood and old ash. Her breath stayed low, steady, each step careful but quick. A shape shifted ahead, a man slumped against the wall, his hand pressed to his side. Not Kane, but the flash of metal on his chest caught her eye, a star-shaped badge, tarnished and dull, but still recognizable. Kane's badge. She dropped to one knee, mud soaking through her coat. His eyes darted to hers, glazed but desperate. Words scraped from his throat like they'd been dragged over gravel. "It wasn't your fault, the train," he coughed, the sound thick, wet. She leaned closer, trying to catch the rest, but his gaze slid past her, fixing on something over her shoulder. The hair on her neck rose. A shadow moved, quick, precise. She twisted, hand on her revolver, but the rifle cracked before she could draw. The man's body jerked once, then went still. The echo of the shot bounced off the alley walls, fading into the rain. She didn't waste time. Her fingers closed over the badge, yanking it from his chest. It was scratched, old, the edges worn like it had seen more years than the man wearing it. She turned it over in her palm, the rain washing blood from its surface in thin red threads. Somewhere ahead, Boots splashed again, retreating, fading. She caught a glimpse, just enough. A figure at the far end of the alley, rifle slung low, moving with the certainty of someone who knew every shadow in this town. The silhouette paused, looked back once, then stepped into the curtain of rain and was gone. The alley was silent now, except for the rain. She stood there, badge clutched tight, staring into the darkness where the shooter had vanished. Her mind ran the words again, the train. The weight of them sat cold in her chest. The man's death hadn't been a warning. It had been a message. And someone out there had just made damn sure she understood it. The rain thinned to a mist by the time she found the tracks. Hoofprints, fresh, pressed deep into the mud, heading east out of town. She followed them without thinking, each step of her horse splashing through puddles that reflected the pale gray sky. The land began to rise, folding in on itself until the trail funneled into a narrow cut of stone. Dead Man's Gulch. The canyon walls loomed high, jagged, the kind of place where sound died fast and bullets flew faster. Her fingers brushed the revolver at her hip, her eyes scanning the ridges above. Somewhere in her gut, a weight told her she wasn't riding in alone. The first shot came from above, a sharp crack that split the air. Her horse screamed, legs folding under it before she could even pull the reins. The impact threw her sideways, the world spinning in mud and stone. She rolled, boots slipping, heart hammering against her ribs. Gunfire erupted from both sides, the echo slamming into the canyon walls. She scrambled for cover, diving behind a slab of rock barely wide enough to shield her shoulders. Splinters of stone sprayed past her cheek as another shot struck, too close. Her breath was ragged, her pulse loud in her ears. She leaned out just enough, sighted the movement, and fired. The return fire came quick, too quick. Whoever was up there wasn't aiming to scare her, they were aiming to finish her. She moved low, darting from one jagged outcrop to another, until the firing slowed. Her boots slipped on wet gravel, nearly sending her down, but she kept going, driven by the pounding of her own heartbeat. Then, silence. The kind that made every instinct scream louder than gunfire. She crouched, scanning the dirt. That's when she saw it, half buried near her boot, a glint of silver against the mud. She brushed it clean. A locket. Heavy, cold. She popped it open with her thumb, and the breath caught in her throat. Kane's picture on one side. Hers on the other. Her grip tightened until her knuckles ached. But the relief was short-lived. Because as her gaze drifted to the badge tucked in her coat, something hit her. The badge she'd taken earlier wasn't Kane's at all. The scratches, the wear, it belonged to someone else. Which meant one thing: someone out there was wearing Kane's badge. And she was going to find out why. The river ran dark under the weight of the storm, swollen and restless, gnawing at its banks like it wanted to pull the land into its depths. She followed the sound of it through the willows until the trees opened into a small clearing. That's when she saw it. A mound of freshly turned earth, the rain smoothing its edges, as if trying to erase it from the world. No marker. No name. Just silence. But it wasn't the grave that stopped her cold. It was what rested on top, Kane's hat, brim bent, the once clean felt stained dark near the crown. Blood. She stood frozen, the river whispering beside her, the sound wrapping around her like a warning. Her breath came slow, every inhale heavy, tasting of wet earth and decay. She knelt, boots sinking in the mud, and reached for the hat. It was heavier than it should have been, soaked through, the brim sagging under the weight of the rain. She turned it in her hands, fingertips brushing the rough patch where the blood had dried. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the river and something older, the faint, metallic tang of rust and soil. The thought pressed hard into her mind, the man she'd been chasing might already be in the ground, and if he was, someone had wanted her to find him this way. Her palm pressed to the mound, feeling the softness of the turned earth. It was fresh, no more than a day, maybe less. And then she felt it. Not stone. Not root. Something buried just beneath the surface. Her fingers dug in, careful, pushing aside the wet soil until the edge of an object took shape. Wood. She scraped it clear, a small box, no bigger than her hand, the grain rough, edges worn from time. She pulled it free and froze. The top bore something she hadn't seen in years. Carved deep, as if with a knife. Her initials. Her chest tightened, the air heavy in her lungs. The river roared on, but in her ears, the world had gone still. She turned the box over in her hands, no hinges, just a lock rusted with age. Whoever had put it here had meant for her to find it, but not to open it. Not yet. She felt the weight of it, heavier than its size should allow, as though whatever lay inside carried more than metal or paper. It carried history. Secrets. Maybe the kind that got men killed. She looked back at the grave, the hat, the swollen river beyond, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if digging deeper would bring her answers, or bury her for good. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one pressing in behind her eyes. Rain hissed on the tin roof of her thoughts, drowning out the present until it all bled away, back to another night. A different fire. She could see it still, the glow licking low at the embers, the smoke curling slow into the black sky. The smell of iron and gunpowder hung thick, clinging to their clothes, to their skin. He sat across from her, boots planted, hat pulled low, the shadow hiding his eyes but not the faint smile at the corner of his mouth. Blood, not his, marked the cuff of his sleeve. They'd walked out of that bounty job alive when no one else had, and somehow that had been enough to bind them, if only for the night. The fire popped, sending sparks toward the stars, and in that flicker, he moved closer. The air between them held the taste of danger and something else, something softer, rarer, that she hadn't dared to name. His hand was warm when it found hers, fingers curling slow, deliberate. He leaned in, and the kiss was brief, stolen, like a secret whispered to the dark. When he pulled back, his eyes had changed, steel where there'd been warmth. "If the day comes you can't trust me," he said, voice low, words catching like a burr in her mind, "make sure you're the one to pull the trigger." He didn't smile after that. Neither did she. The memory faded like smoke on the wind, leaving the sharp ache of its truth behind. She was back in the present, the grave and the river and the locked box heavy in her mind. Her fingers brushed the locket in her pocket, tracing the outline of their faces inside, wondering if that day had finally come, the day he'd warned her about. The air had thickened, heavy enough to slow her breath, when the thunder split the sky in two. It was so close she felt it in her ribs. And beneath the crack of the storm came another sound, distant but steady. Hoofbeats. More than one. Getting closer. The memory faded like smoke on the wind, leaving the sharp ache of its truth behind. She was back in the present, the grave and the river and the locked box heavy in her mind. Her fingers brushed the locket in her pocket, tracing the outline of their faces inside, wondering if that day had finally come, the day he'd warned her about. The air had thickened, heavy enough to slow her breath, when the thunder split the sky in two. It was so close she felt it in her ribs. And beneath the crack of the storm came another sound, distant but steady. Hoofbeats. More than one. Getting closer. She turned toward the sound, eyes scanning the tree line. The rain blurred the shapes at first, until movement cut clean against the gray, riders, dark and silent, their approach hidden under the roar of the river and the pounding in her chest. They weren't in a hurry. They didn't need to be. She knew enough about men who rode like that to understand they'd already decided what came next. Her hand found the revolver at her hip, the weight of it a cold promise. Somewhere out there, beyond the curtain of rain, the past was riding toward her, and this time, it wasn't alone. The canyon walls rose like the ribs of some buried giant, jagged and close enough to choke the wind. Every sound here had a way of crawling back to you, the echo of hooves, the creak of leather, the faint rasp of breath. She'd been riding slow, careful, when the first wisp of smoke curled into view ahead. Not campfire smoke. This was darker, thicker, twisting lazy in the damp air like it had all the time in the world. She felt it before she saw them, a shift in the air, the stillness that only comes when predators are close. And then, shapes emerged. Horses. Riders, faces hidden behind rags and goggles, their coats hanging heavy with rain and shadow. They didn't call out. Didn't draw fast. They just closed the circle, silent as a noose. One leaned forward in his saddle, tilting his head like he was measuring the space between her heartbeat and the trigger. The first shot cracked the air, not hers. Pain seared past her ear as she ducked low, drawing and firing in the same breath. The rider to her right lurched back, clutching his chest, his horse screaming under him. She spun toward another, hand locking in his collar, dragging him half out of the saddle. Rain slicked his mask, but she could see the whites of his eyes. His voice was a rasp, words spat through the storm, the lawman's not who you think. They didn't call out. Didn't draw fast. They just closed the circle, silent as a noose. One leaned forward in his saddle, tilting his head like he was measuring the space between her heartbeat and the trigger. The first shot cracked the air, not hers. Pain seared past her ear as she ducked low, drawing and firing in the same breath. The rider to her right lurched back, clutching his chest, his horse screaming under him. She spun toward another, hand locking in his collar, dragging him half out of the saddle. Rain slicked his mask, but she could see the whites of his eyes. His voice was a rasp, words spat through the storm, the lawman's not who you think. They didn't call out. Didn't draw fast. They just closed the circle, silent as a noose. One leaned forward in his saddle, tilting his head like he was measuring the space between her heartbeat and the trigger. The first shot cracked the air, not hers. Pain seared past her ear as she ducked low, drawing and firing in the same breath. The rider to her right lurched back, clutching his chest, his horse screaming under him. She spun toward another, hand locking in his collar, dragging him half out of the saddle. Rain slicked his mask, but she could see the whites of his eyes. His voice was a rasp, words spat through the storm, the lawman's not who you think. The water swallowed her in a single, crushing embrace. It wasn't the clean plunge of a dive, it was impact, bone-jarring, breath-stealing. The cold struck first, then the weight, pressing her down into a black that didn't seem to end. Somewhere above, the surface rippled with stormlight, but it was already too far, too blurred. The roar of the river dulled to a muffled thrum, her heartbeat louder than anything else. She reached, but her limbs felt heavy, slow, and in the last sliver of thought before everything bled away, she heard the words again, not from the man she'd grabbed, but from somewhere deep in her mind, the lawman's not who you think. Then, nothing. The river has a way of keeping what it wants, and spitting out what it doesn't. She came to in the half-light, the kind of gray that makes it hard to tell if the day is being born or dying. Every bone in her body ached, her skin stiff with mud, her breath a thin rasp. The current whispered beside her, steady, like it knew a secret it wouldn't share. She tried to move, and that's when she saw it, a dark shape just within reach, caught in the roots of a waterlogged tree. A saddlebag, leather swollen and dark with river water, marked with 2 letters burned deep into the flap. K.A. Kane. The sight of it sent a slow chill crawling up her spine. The river had carried her here, but it had carried something else too. Her fingers were stiff, clumsy from the cold, but she worked the buckle loose. The leather creaked like old bones, and the smell of damp powder and river silt rose from within. The first thing she found was weight, a box of cartridges, dry despite the soak. Then, nestled beneath, a silver pocket watch, its surface etched and worn, ticking slow like a heartbeat trying to keep its place in the world. She turned it over in her palm, and the sight of the engraving on the back, the same initials, K.A., was enough to make her chest tighten. But it was the last item that turned her blood to ice. It was folded tight, sealed in wax that hadn't cracked despite the journey. She broke it open, hands trembling, and pulled free a sheet of paper, its edges soft from damp air. The words were sharp, black, official. Her name at the top, bold and unflinching. A warrant. Her warrant. Signed in a hand she knew better than her own. Kane's. She stared at it until the ink seemed to shift and swim before her eyes, the sound of the river growing louder, harsher, like it wanted to drown the questions rising in her mind. Every memory of him pressed in at once, the warmth of his voice, the heat of his warning, the promise he once made under a blood-red sky. And now this. Was it betrayal? Or was it something else, a twisted kind of protection she couldn't yet see? The wind stirred the reeds, a low hiss like someone telling her to move, to choose before the answer chose her. She folded the paper slow, slid it back into the bag, and felt the weight of the watch, the cartridges, the warrant. They were heavier together, as if the river had placed not just evidence in her hands, but a decision. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a branch snapped. Someone was watching. And in that moment, she knew, the river hadn't given her a gift. It had given her a warning. The storm came in quiet, like it was trying to hide its teeth. She followed his trail out past the edge of town, through cottonwoods that leaned under the wind, their branches scraping against one another like old bones. Every step drew her closer to a place that shouldn't have been breathing in the dark, an abandoned church, the steeple cracked, its cross hanging crooked as if even God had turned away. The rain started thin, tapping the tin roof in a rhythm she almost recognized. Then lightning tore across the sky, laying the whole building bare in a cold, white flash. He was inside. She felt it before she saw him. The doors groaned when she pushed them open, the sound swallowed by the hollow space within. Rain leaked through gaps in the roof, falling in thin, silver threads that shimmered when the lightning flared. The pews were warped and split, the altar draped in dust. And there he was, standing in the aisle as if he'd been waiting all along. Older now, the lines in his face carved deep, a bruise shadowing one cheek. His eyes were steady, not surprised. Like he'd known she would come, and exactly what she'd bring with her. The warrant still sat heavy in her pocket. She wondered if he could hear it rustling in the silence between them. His voice broke the air first. Low. Flat. You should have read the back of that warrant. The words didn't sound like a warning, more like an accusation. She didn't answer, just let the rain do the talking while she took a slow step closer. He reached into his coat and for a moment her hand hovered near her holster, but all he pulled free was a flask, the metal catching the light like a knife. He took a sip before speaking again. It was the only way. The only way to keep every bounty man between here and the state line from putting you in the ground. Her breath came slow, measured, but her pulse betrayed her, thudding hard against her ribs. She wanted to believe him. She almost did. But the way his eyes flicked toward the door, just for a heartbeat, told her there was something else, something he wasn't saying. Lightning struck again, painting his face in a momentary mask of guilt. She tightened her grip on the warrant in her pocket, feeling the damp edges bite into her fingers. Outside, the storm was building. Inside, so was she. Thunder rolled in close enough to rattle the glass in the church windows. She stood there, rain dripping from the brim of her hat, boots sinking into the warped wood floor, watching the man who'd once been the only thing she trusted. His shadow swayed with each flicker of lightning, tall against the wall, like it was something separate from him. He didn't rush to speak. He let the silence swell, let it weigh her down until she felt it in her bones. Then his voice came, rough from too many nights without rest. "It was never me you had to worry about." The words landed heavy, but she didn't move. He took a step closer, and the light caught the edge of something in his hand, not a weapon, but a folded scrap of paper gone soft from being read too many times. He opened it, smoothing it with his thumb, and the emblem stamped in the corner bled red under the dim light. "The railroad," he said. Just 2 words, but they cracked the air. "They're the ones writing your name into graves." "Mine too." "That badge? That warrant?" "All of it's a rope they've been tightening." He tossed the paper onto a pew, and it landed like a dead bird. She didn't have to pick it up to know it stank of truth. The storm outside pressed harder, rain hitting the roof in waves, drowning out the world beyond these walls. "If you stay," he said, eyes locked on hers, "you'll die. If you leave, you might just make it to morning." The line hung between them like the edge of a blade. She wanted to spit back that running wasn't in her blood, that the morning didn't matter if she had to live it knowing they'd won. But the way he said it, the weight in his voice, told her he wasn't begging. He was warning. And Kane wasn't a man who wasted breath on empty threats. Her fingers twitched near her belt, not for the gun, but for the box with her initials carved into it. The one that had been following her since the river. She didn't know why, but it felt heavier now. She stepped closer, slow, her boots ringing against the boards. Kane didn't flinch, didn't back away. Outside, lightning split the sky wide open, and for a heartbeat, she saw the truth not in his words, but in his eyes, a truth that said this wasn't about survival anymore. This was about choosing which side of the grave you wanted to stand on when the sun came up. The storm had slowed to a cold, steady rain, the kind that seeps into your bones and stays there. Inside the church, the air was thick with breath and silence. They stood close enough to feel each other's heartbeat, close enough that the world beyond those 4 rotting walls felt a lifetime away. She looked at him like a woman staring down the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall was coming, knowing she'd jump anyway. He didn't ask what she was thinking. Maybe he already knew. She stepped forward, boots whispering against the wet boards, and let her hand rest against his jaw. Rain slid from her fingertips to his skin. Then she kissed him, slow, steady, as if she could pour every memory, every unspoken word, into that single breath they shared. It wasn't the kiss of a woman asking for forgiveness, or giving it. It was the kiss of someone who'd already decided there was no road left for them to walk together. When she pulled away, the rain still clung between them like threads trying to hold on. She reached to her side, unbuckling the revolver she'd carried through dust, blood, and betrayal, and pressed it into his palm. Her voice was low, steady, but it cut through the air like a blade. "Do it. Or they'll do worse." For a long second, neither of them moved. The weight of the gun seemed to pull his arm down, his fingers curling around the grip like it burned. His knuckles whitened. His breath caught. But the sound she waited for, the click, the shot, never came. His hand trembled. She could see it in his eyes, the war between the man who knew what had to be done and the man who couldn't bring himself to do it. The gun hung there between them, the decision like a shadow neither of them could step out of. Then, in the distance, faint at first but growing clearer, came the sound. Hoofbeats. Slow at first, then faster. Closer. The kind of sound that turns the stomach, because it doesn't just mean someone's coming, it means you're out of time. The night had bled into morning, though the rain had stopped hours ago. The sky was pale gold at the edges, that fragile color that comes before the sun decides whether it's going to rise warm or cold. She sat in the saddle, still as the stone she'd leaned on through too many long nights, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Behind her, the town still slept, or pretended to. The kind of silence that comes after a gunfight, when everyone's too scared to open their doors and see who's left standing. Her horse shifted beneath her, hoofs scuffing in the dust, but she didn't move. Not yet. In her hand, a torn scrap of paper fluttered with the breeze. The warrant. His name scrawled across it in ink now smeared by rain. She let the pieces slip from her fingers, watched them tumble into the dirt behind her, each fragment carrying something she could never take back. Some folks would later say she left him standing there that morning, that she rode out without looking over her shoulder. They'd be wrong. Part of her never left that night. The horse started forward, slow at first, then faster, until the sound of hoofbeats was all that filled the waking canyon. Dust rose in her wake, curling and twisting in the new light. In that dust, half hidden in the shadow of the church, a man stood. Older now. Hurt. His hand pressed to his side, blood darkening the fabric there. Kane. Watching her go. Not calling out. Not stopping her. Just watching. His eyes followed her until she was nothing but a shadow crossing the ridge, swallowed by the morning sun. Some swear that was the last time they saw her. They're wrong. Because out here, nothing's ever as finished as you want it to be. And that was not the last time they crossed paths. If you want to hear the rest of her story, subscribe to the channel. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.